Life keeps forcing cruel choices.
Life keeps forcing cruel choices. Clair Obscur is a masterclass in storytelling, starting off dark and depressing, and then just never really improving from there. The apparent villain changes throughout the story, with the Paintress and Renoir being the villain for the first 2 acts, then the real Renoir taking over for Act 3, and then Verso or Maelle taking up the reins at the last moment, depending on your choice. And Clea shows her colors during the postgame. I couldn't decide on which one of them I wanted to focus on, and so I concluded that the grief each of the Dessendres endures causes them to all act as a villain in one way or another, so join me for part 1 of diving into Clair Obscur's villains, where we'll cover the aspects of their lives primarily relevant to the main story. Jumping right into the dark and depressing parts, the main conflict of the game is set off by a house fire. The Dessendres were a family of painters capable of creating painted worlds through their craft. For whatever unexplained reason, the family is involved in a conflict with a group called the Writers. Details of what happened aren't given, but the Writers are somehow able to take advantage of Alicia, the youngest daughter, and her naivete, and use this to set fire to the Dessendres family home. The middle child, Verso, went out of his way to save Alicia's life in the house fire, but this came at the cost of his own. Alicia would survive thanks to her brother's intervention, but her face would be permanently scarred and her throat damaged to the point where even speaking or breathing was painful for her. The Dessendres family began to crumble after the incident. Struck with the grief of losing their son or brother, or dealing with the damage the fire had done to them, had caused the family to act differently, irrationally even. And life with the Dessendres would never be the same again.
Sometimes I feel sorry for her.
Who? The paintress?
Look at her. She looks sad. Maybe she's a prisoner too, stuck in the same cycle with us. Silly her.
The mother of the Dessendres family, Aline, aka the Paintress, is the first antagonist we're introduced to. Although her story ends up going in a completely different direction than we initially expected, I still believe she should be considered as a villain or antagonist, just from an alternate perspective. We get a few glimpses into her life as a mother via her memories that are shown at the monolith, where we mainly see her teaching her children to paint or play the piano, alongside a couple arguments with her husband Renoir or her daughter Alicia.
But at least those memories remain. What hurts more are the memories unmade. The conversations we'll never have. The time we'll never spend.
Aline took her son's death particularly hard, and would enter his canvas where she could still feel Verso's presence. However, there were dangers to spending too much time inside of a painted world, and Aline refused to let go of her son, causing her to approach the limit of what was safe. Inside the canvas, she repainted her family from her memories, including Verso, as replacements for her real family in an effort to recreate what was taken away from her. Her painted family was unable to die so that she wouldn't have to experience the pain she suffered from seeing Verso die ever again. But they weren't perfect replicas of her family. They didn't behave the same as the ones in reality.
That was mean. I thought he cared. Renoir's not being Renoir.
The painted Renoir would have an undying loyalty to Aline and her intentions, as opposed to the real Renoir and his fierce battle against her, trying to save his wife from the canvas. Clea was so unhappy with her painted self that she painted over it and trapped it in the Flying Manor, far away from everyone else. As I just mentioned, Renoir wasn't happy with his wife retreating into Verso's canvas, especially since she refused to leave. 67 canvas years before the start of the game, Time works differently in canvases, although I'm not sure exactly how differently. He entered the canvas to force her out, and their conflict would cause something later known as the Fracture to occur, flinging the city of Lumiere out of the main continent and into the middle of the ocean. To get his wife out of the canvas, Renoir started erasing the canvas in a phenomenon that would later be known as the gommage. Aline was the more skilled painter, however, and she was able to use her power to protect the people inside, and she sealed Renoir away in the abyss below the monolith. Their oldest daughter, Clea, entered the canvas briefly to lend Renoir some aid, painting monsters known as Nevrons. When people were killed by Clea's Nevrons, their chroma, or energy, wouldn't return to Aline and would instead remain within the bodies of the deceased. And so Aline warned the people of the canvas. She painted numbers on the monolith to show the maximum age of the people she would be able to protect from the gommage, but since she was so far away from Lumiere, she couldn't directly tell people what she was doing, and so they thought that her warnings were a threat. They would call her the Paintress, and she was assumed to be some sort of malevolent god, punishing them for their sins. Lumiere would launch expeditions out yearly with the goal of defeating the Paintress and putting an end to the gommage, with varying levels of success. However, none prior to the game would achieve their goal, and would only pave the way for those who come after.
My favorite theory is that she's some crazy demonic maths teacher, and this is our punishment for failing at numbers. A load of superstitious hysteria, but at least we're here now. It's worth it just to walk these valleys. I've barely seen a meadow since Lady Genocide and her poison smoke took up residence.
Despite these expeditions failing, not all of them were to the Paintress. Some of them were killed by the painted Renoir that she had created, but many were killed by the Nevrons created by Clea, or the Axons created by Renoir, or in some cases even just gommaging. Prior to Expedition 33, only one other expedition had discovered the truth of it all. The absolute legends, the ultimate gigachads themselves, the ones who refused to wear clothes, Expedition 60. Somehow they had managed to break through the barrier protecting the monolith through sheer raw skill and power, and they learned the truth about the Paintress. One of them was sent back to Lumiere with a journal to warn future expeditions of the truth, but he could not outrun the gommage, and the truth was never passed on.
That's how we were able to charge through that ghostly gommage barrier and reach the Paintress. But it seems we've been wrong about what she is. The Paintress is just as trapped as we. The real terror lies beneath the monolith. The rest of Expedition 60 marched on to confront him, while I was tasked to warn Lumiere. But it seems I might have run out of time. One last swim separates me from Lumiere, but even with my mighty muscles, I don't know if I can outswim the gommage.
The real terror lies beneath the monolith.
But then I met Aline, who showed me that I could save you. With her help, I descended to the bottom of the monolith, where Aline had sealed him away. The one who brings the gommage. The one who threatens our very existence. But his powers are strong, and I'm finding it harder and harder to fight his influence over my mind.
Ever since the fracture up until the beginning of Act 3, Renoir spends his time trapped down below the monolith, sealed away by his wife. We never get to see him as he's trapped there, but in Act 3, making our way through Renoir's drafts to the abyss where he was trapped has us cross a man, Simon, a member of Expedition 0 who we'll cover more in the next section. Renoir was responsible for the creation of the axons in the canvas, and much like his wife, his creations were also modeled after his own family. Visage was meant to represent his son, Verso, Sirene, his wife, the Reacher, Alicia, and the Hauler, Clea. I couldn't find it stated anywhere in the game as to why Renoir created the axons in his family's image, but I imagine they were similar to why Aline made painted copies of the family. I stated that Aline is the main antagonist towards the Dessendres family, and opposite her we have Renoir, the main antagonist towards the people of Verso's canvas. Ultimately, the lives inside the canvas are incompatible with his goal of getting his family back and having them properly move on after Verso's death.
Doesn't mean you have to erase Verso's canvas.
Child, do you think I want to? After all the sorrows we've endured, do you really think that I want to destroy this last piece of his soul?
He doesn't hate them, but he knows what has to be done. As long as the canvas exists, Aline and now Alicia will try to find their way back, fleeing from their problems in the real world, leaving a horrifying image for those who remain. And so, this is why he forces the gommage. Much like Aline, not a whole lot from his life before the fire is really told, but we get a couple snippets here and there. Firstly, he's obviously a painter, much like his wife, although Clea claims that he's not quite as skilled as her. This is somewhat corroborated by what Renoir says right after his boss fight. He mentions that Aline was the one who taught him the dangers of the canvas and kept him from staying inside too long, implying that she was more experienced than him. Secondly, Renoir was proud of his children. Clea for being so accomplished and talented, Verso for his humor and inside jokes they shared, and Alicia, his hidden star who was too shy and self-conscious to realize. Renoir projects a version of himself known as the Curator outside of the Abyss to help the expeditioners take down the Paintress. We know he helps expeditions 33 and 58, but it's probably reasonable to assume he got involved with several more as well. For Expedition 33, he helps us by upgrading our tints, weapons, and lumina capacity, strengthening us in our fight against the Paintress.
Well, at least we can upgrade our pictos.
You sure about that, Maelle? Can we? Additionally, he takes the Axon Hearts from us in Act 2 and crafts us the Barrier Breaker, a weapon that allows us to break the barrier surrounding the monolith and challenge the Paintress. As soon as Expedition 33 defeats the Paintress, Renoir is freed from his prison beneath the monolith. What's left of Expedition 33 returns to Lumiere to deliver the good news and celebrate, but the festivities are interrupted as Renoir begins a complete gommage of the canvas. Every one of Aline's creations except for Maelle gommages on the spot, and Renoir finally reveals himself. As Maelle and Verso approach him, he sheds his form as the Curator, and he gives his daughter a hug. He acknowledges Aline's work in the painted Verso, and apologizes to him for being dragged into their family's quarrel.
Please accept the Dessendres family's apologies. I know it seems absurd to offer oblivion as recompense, but perhaps that's the outcome we both desire.
Aline has been forced out of the canvas, but he recognizes that she won't stay gone forever, and as soon as she finds the canvas again, she'll return. He can't let up while she's too sick to return and has to capitalize on this opportunity to destroy the canvas. Maelle tries to convince him otherwise, especially since she hid the canvas before coming in. But Renoir knows his wife. He knows that she'll never give up trying to find it and refuses to budge on his stance. And on top of his wife, his daughter has now found a home in the canvas, likely to meet the same fate as her mother, further motivating him to a race.
You treat me as if I'm still 5!
I treat you as if the shadow from the worst day of our lives is going to suffocate you and take you from us too! Enough. I said, enough.
And so he fights his daughter and his wife's rendition of his son, alongside Monoko and the ones Maelle brought back. He summons his Axons to help him out during the fight, but Aline re-enters the canvas briefly to take them out while the expedition focuses on Renoir.
Put aside the canvas. It's killing you both.
Not this time!
After being defeated, he laments on the irony of Aline being the one who taught him how to responsibly use their gift as painters. He tries to exert his parental authority over Alicia in one last attempt to get her to see reason.
67 years. 67 years I spent trapped within the monolith. But I persisted. Do you know why? Do you know why I cannot leave her or you behind? This is what I see every day. I cannot spend another day with living corpses. Since the fire, our family has crumbled. Aline in the canvas. Clea fighting her solitary war. You, a living ghost. Verso's death broke us. Want it to be fixed. I need it to be fixed. I cannot lose you too.
Alicia convinces him that she only wants to spend a little longer here in the canvas. Renoir realizes that she was lying, but concedes to her, probably realizing that he was in danger due to how long he'd spent in the canvas already. He promises that he'll leave a light on for her, and then exits the canvas.
Claire won't be happy either. They're probably driving each other crazy right now. Although, I doubt Claire's been home much. Knowing her, she's probably hunting down the writers responsible for the fire.
The oldest child of the Dessendres family, Clea bears responsibility for bringing the writers to justice. On the surface, she doesn't seem to care much about what's going on in the canvas, and doesn't particularly care who wins between her parents.
Renoir is wasting time in there, trying to help someone who doesn't want his help. We have more urgent matters to attend to.
But Renoir would be useful to her in her war against the writers, so she offers him her aid in trying to force Aline out, therefore picking a side and becoming an antagonist towards the people of Verso's canvas. Her contribution was painting the Nevrons to kill off the expeditioners. Ordinarily, when someone in the canvas died or gommaged, their chroma would return to Aline, but when killed by the Nevrons, their chroma would remain in their bodies. Over time, Aline would gradually lose her chroma so that Renoir would be able to get the upper hand.
The dead here don't disappear like in Lumiere. Their chroma stays inside their bodies.
In terms of her presence in the game, she is easily given the least out of everybody in this video, only appearing in the epilogue, Endless Tower, Flying Manor, and a non-speaking role in one of the endings, although she is mentioned or alluded to a handful of times outside of these. Through dialogue with the specters or fading people throughout the game, we learned that Clea and Verso were very close and spent a lot of time in the canvas when they were younger. In the Endless Tower, Clea's specter tells us that she painted half the world with Verso. They went on adventures here while Alicia was sitting reading in her room. She had set up the Endless Tower as a challenge for Verso, putting him through a gauntlet with wave after wave of Nevrons to survive. In Stonewave Cliffs, Verso's specter tells us that he and Clea used to be best friends, but she had outgrown him, and now had more important things going on and people to be around. In Yellow Harvest, his specter reminisces about all the fun that they used to have here, and wishes that he and Clea could still have fun, lamenting about the Nevrons that she had painted eating their world. Next up, we have the Flying Manor, where the painted Clea resides, although it's not quite the same Clea that Aline had painted. It's implied that Clea was displeased with the representations of her within Verso's canvas.
I bet Claire hated Maman's portrait of her, so she painted over her.
And so she painted over herself and sealed it away in the Flying Manor, far from everything else in the world. Verso's specter up here comments on how Clea was a perfectionist, and the one who is here now was imperfect, implying that's the reason Clea was displeased. Clea entered the canvas around the same time as her father, and met with a segment of Expedition Zero as they approached the barrier surrounding the monolith. She told them the truth about the paintress and the canvas, trying to get them to turn back, before trying to kill them when they refused. One specific member of Expedition Zero, Simon, Clea had a plan for, however. Simon had fallen in love with the painted version of Clea, and so she manipulated him into doing her bidding. She gave him the strength to kill an Axon, and had him kill the second representation of her that she was unhappy with, the Hoarder. She then sent him to the monolith to defeat Aline and send her back to the real world. But Simon figured out that something was awry. He realized he was being manipulated, and when he met Aline, he actually sided with her. Aline told Simon of a way for him to save his Clea by descending down into the abyss below the monolith and defeating Renoir, the one who brings the gommage. Renoir, though, was too powerful for Simon, and slowly eroded away at his mind, eventually causing him to completely lose it. And by the time we discover Simon, he's a husk of his former self.
My love, these foes are beneath you. You, who have fought heaven and earth, and subdued giants. To find me, to free me from her grasp. Would you fall now to the likes of them? While your oath remains unfulfilled, rise. Your enemies await.
Spectre Verso's dialogue in the painting workshops further hints at the shift in Clea's personality. He talks about the Nevrons that Clea had painted to tilt the balance in Renoir's favor, and focuses primarily on one in particular. She wove her spite into the canvas, birthing a horror to plague my nights. A sister's brush, a stroke of fear. The monster she painted, it lives in my night. He specifically calls out this one particular Nevron as something of nightmares, as if its creation was something personal and made out of spite towards him. I forgot to include this part initially, so I'm just gonna kinda awkwardly shove it in here at the end. Esquier's relationship shows us that Francois and Clea were very close in the past, back before she outgrew Verso's canvas. Esquier says that the two of them were best friends and used to sing together all the time, and she clearly left a lasting impression on him. He'd never admit it to anyone's face, of course, as evidenced by him refusing to trade Yuri for Verso and Esquier's masterpiece rendition of him and Clea. But after losing a fight to Verso and giving up Yuri, he still asks them to leave their other rock behind.
He really does miss her.
I'm not clear on whether Clea painted Francois. I don't recall the game telling us who painted him, but it seems to be a common fan theory and one that I think holds a lot of water. After we defeat Renoir and save the canvas, we don't get our happy, or sad, ending immediately. There is still one final obstacle to overcome, and one more antagonist to enter the fray. Verso wants to stop painting. His soul would finally be allowed to rest, and his family would be forced to face reality and overcome the consequences of the house fire together. Alicia, on the other hand, has rediscovered her life within the canvas, free from the prison waiting for her in her real body. As Maelle, she can painlessly talk and breathe. To her, Gustave and the rest of them are as much of a family as what's waiting for her outside, or at least what's left. But her freedom comes at a cost. Aline won't give up on trying to re-enter Verso's canvas, and Verso's soul will be denied the rest it so truly desires as it continues to get wrapped up in his family's quarrel. And so we're given a decision. Side with Maelle, saving the canvas and all of those within it, but prolonging the hell that the Dessendres family is going through and potentially endanger Maelle and Aline due to them never wanting to leave the canvas. Or side with Verso, granting oblivion to our friends that we spent the last 30 plus hours growing attached to, forcing Maelle back into her disabled body, but allowing his family to accept reality and begin recovering from this incident that had haunted their lives.
Oh, my darling girl. We have precious little time together. You'll never know us. But I want you to know that you are loved. I want you to know you're not alone. You will always be the beautiful child I held in my arms. You will smile the brightest smile. You will cry iridescent tears. You will know love, and you will know pain. You will know loss all too well, because we live in an unforgiving world. But you are strong, and you will survive. You will struggle, and you will learn. You'll find people to call your own, and you will shine as their guiding light. For you will change the world, and the people around you. You'll forever be our princess. I have decided on her name. And her name will be John C.
Sorry about that. No, I'm not. Maelle, or Alicia, is our next potential antagonist. Like Aline, she's an antagonist towards the Dessendres, as she has grown far too attached to Verso's painted world and also refuses to leave or let it go. As mentioned at the start of the video, Alicia accidentally enabled the fire to happen, with her unknown actions somehow allowing the writers to carry out their sabotage. Despite being horribly injured in the fire, she still wanted to help put the family back together afterwards. In the real world, she hid Verso's canvas so that her mother wouldn't be able to find it after she was removed, and Clea sent her in after her parents to try and offer Renoir some aid.
And repaint your throat when you're in there, before you completely forget how to have a conversation.
But something went wrong as Alicia entered the canvas, and her soul wound up in the body of one of Aline's creations, a newborn girl in Lumiere named Maelle. She lost all her memories as Alicia upon entering the canvas, and had a second childhood as Maelle. Her parents were lost to the Gommage when she was around 3 years old, and then she bounced around from family to family until finally being adopted into Gustave and Emma's family. Despite being accepted by the two of them, Maelle never really felt at home in Lumiere, and at age 16 decided to join Expedition 33 alongside Gustave, despite her own Gommage still being 9 years away. At the attack on the beach, she was rescued by the painted Verso and taken away to the Flying Waters, where she found a door to the Dessendres manor. Inside, she'd find the real Renoir, masquerading as the voiceless curator. Gustave and Lune would find her here after reading Verso's message at the Indigo Tree, and the three of them would carry on the expedition's journey to kill the Paintress, reuniting with Ciel shortly after. Her next major hurdle would come at the Stone Wave Cliffs, where the painted Renoir was waiting for them. After recovering Flory, Gustave and Maelle hold back a moment to reflect and throw some stones as they like to do, but their moment is cut short by the painted Renoir. He attacks and kills Gustave, and Maelle can only watch on in horror as Gustave is slaughtered right in front of her eyes. Painted Verso steps in and distracts Renoir, allowing Maelle to join Lune, Ciel, and Esquier in escaping. Despite being down a member, the expedition resolves to carry on. Verso comes and finds them at their camp, offering them Gustave's arm back, and now that Esquier has found Flory, they can cross the ocean. Arriving at the forgotten battlefield, Maelle has a bit of an outburst. She's furious about Gustave's death and begins to show some cracks in her resolve.
Holding up. Everywhere we go, just death. Death and more death. Everywhere we go, just death. I don't want to see that anymore.
Look, Maelle,
I thought you would understand. You said you spent your immortality burying the people around you. Doesn't any of this bother you? And you. Gustave's dead. How can you keep going like nothing happened?
Heartbroken, she asks if they can bury Gustave, to which Verso says he knows a place, out of sight of the Paintress.
We could never tell if you were my brother or my father. But to me, you were both. Best brother and father I've ever had.
They find the spot Verso was talking about, a tree in a tranquil little alcove, and have a short ceremony to send him on. Back at camp, Maelle apologizes to Lune about her earlier outburst, and they continue on, recruiting Verso's old friend Monoko, and then onwards to Old Lumiere. We'll go over Old Lumiere in a bit more depth in the next section, but for now the relevant bit is near the end, when Renoir and Verso drop some hints that they know a little bit more about Maelle than we do.
You haven't told her the truth, have you, son? Why can't you accept who you are?
And just before the Dessendres manor in the city disappears, she comes face to face with her painted doppelganger, and the two of them stare at each other for a while. Maelle asks for her name, but the painted Alicia doesn't have her voice, and so all she can do is turn away and walk back into the manor. When tracking down the Axon Hearts, Maelle notes that Siren's dance is familiar to her, and this isn't the first time something like this has happened. Way back in Flying Waters, she says that Goblu felt familiar. In Old Lumiere, when she comes across the Dessendres manor, she feels like she knows the place. Her memories as Alicia were seeping through, and deep down she recognized these things, but wasn't quite aware of why. Goblu was one of Verso's creations in his canvas. The Dessendres manor was obviously her home, and Siren's dance was one that her mother used to do. After obtaining the two Axon Hearts and handing them to the curator, he crafts the barrier breaker, which is given to Maelle, granting her the honors of breaking the barrier herself. They make their way through the monolith, coming across her mother's memories as they go, defeating her painted Renoir once and for all, and then finally arriving at the Paintress herself, who takes note of Maelle.
Alicia. Alicia.
Your face.
Maelle wonders what she means by this, while the rest of the expedition pieces together that Alicia is the Paintress's daughter and that she must resemble Maelle. Aline eventually turns on the party, forcing them to defeat her. Just before being ejected from the canvas, Aline calls out to Alicia once more, and then Maelle and Verso lean down and gommage the paintress. With the expedition now successful, Maelle walks up to the cliff's edge and plants their flag. Symbolically this time, as there won't be any more need for future expeditions to follow after them. We've gone over a lot of what happens next in Renoir's section, so let's skip over a few things here. Maelle has now fully regained her memories as Alicia and understands that she has some of the same powers as the paintress and Renoir. So she scrounges up all the chroma she has and repaints Lune and Ciel, who had just been gommaged by Renoir. They realize they don't stand a chance against Renoir as is, and so they travel all around the continent, finding the bodies of all the dead expeditioners. Since most of them were killed by Nevrons, their chroma still lay dormant in their bodies, and Maelle was able to repaint them for a short time and lead them into battle against Renoir, who had now taken over Lumiere. Maelle tries to talk her father out of erasing the canvas, pleading that because of the canvas she's found new joy in life, but she's unable to convince him, and so they fight. After defeating him, she manages to get him to concede and allow her to stay in the canvas. Maelle is lying about only needing a little while longer in here, and Renoir picks up on this, but as I've mentioned, he probably needs to get out and recover. She follows Verso to where the last fragment of his soul is, and he calls her out on her lie.
See things as they are, not how you want them to be.
What?
You lied to your father.
No,
Yes, I do. But he wanted to believe.
Maelle was terrified to leave the canvas. She was convinced that the second she leaves, Renoir erases the canvas and everything she went through would have been for nothing.
what life? My life of loneliness in a shell of a body, with no voice and no future.
You're Maelle. No matter where you are, you don't need this canvas.
But everything I want is here. Here I have a chance to live, Verso, to live. Out there I merely exist.
But Verso is exhausted and wants to stop painting, and he also wants Maelle to give up on his canvas. Maelle is unwilling to accept this, and so she picks up her sword against him, fighting for the future of the canvas.
Burying everyone you know while you live on can weigh you down a bit.
And finally, we have someone who's caught up in the middle of all this family drama, Aline's creation, the painted Verso.
Some of Aline's finest work. I regret that it caused you so much pain. What Aline did was unfair to you most of all.
Like Maelle, Verso is our last potential villain because of his role in the ending, pitting him against Maelle, the canvas, and everyone we, and he, met and formed relationships with throughout the game. He, alongside the rest of his painted family, were created by Aline in an attempt to recreate the family experience that was taken away from her in the fire. As I'm specifically referring to the painted Verso in this section, I'm not going to be looking into the real Verso here. Also, saying painted Verso is a huge mouthful, so I'm just going to be referring to him as Verso for simplicity's sake. Just know I'm talking about Aline's Verso and not the real one. Presumably, Verso would have lived in Lumiere until Renoir entered the painting and caused the fracture, when he would have joined Expedition Zero in their attempt to locate old Lumiere and recover the survivors. He was very close with a woman named Julie, and seems to have been romantically involved with her. Julie seems to have been another member of Expedition Zero, alongside Verso, Renoir, and Simon, along with a few other minor characters. The expedition comes across the monolith in their search, where the real Clea meets them, tells them the truth of the canvas, and tries to turn them away. They don't listen to her, and so she tries to kill them. Julie sees what happens to Verso in the fight, and mentioned how he got hit by an attack that should have destroyed half his torso, but he was merely left with a bruise. After this, her trust in Verso and Renoir had been completely shattered, and so she and a few other members of Expedition Zero planned to kidnap him in the night and demand answers. One of Maelle's nightmares shows us a brief glimpse into the aftermath of their attempt. Specifics aren't clear, but presumably Verso and Renoir fought back and were forced to kill their would-be interrogators. Verso's journal shows that Renoir had grown concerned that Julie and the others were Clea's creations. Verso and Renoir then returned to Lumiere, took the painted version of Alicia with them, and set off for the continent. Verso then spends the next 67 years plotting ways to eject his mother from the painting and save her. This ultimately pits him against the painted Renoir, who is still completely under Aline's control. He helps out the various expeditions in their attempts at stopping the Paintress, but until 33, they all fall short. We don't know exactly what expeditions he journeyed with, but 58's journal specifically mentions him, telling them about the axons and how their hearts could be crafted into a weapon strong enough to break the barrier. During this time, he befriends a couple of the real Verso's creations, Esquier and Monoko, and they form an incredibly close bond.
3 years, 67 days, and roughly 10 hours.
10 hours and 7 minutes.
Oh, you've been counting too.
Roughly.
At the same time as Alicia enters the canvas, Clea also makes a brief visit to inform Verso of his sister and asks him to watch over her. For the next 16 years, he'd occasionally visit Lumiere and check in on Maelle from afar. And when she embarked on her journey with Expedition 33, Verso was the one who saved her from Renoir at the beach, and he set out ahead of the expedition, clearing out the really dangerous Nevrons for her. He's first introduced to the player at the end of Stonewave Cliffs, when he saves everyone except Gustave from Renoir. Like Renoir, he arrives before the expedition does, and lies in wait for the perfect moment to jump in. Immediately after Gustave is killed.
I was afraid. If he found out about the canvas and he was there, he would refuse to help me send Maman home.
He jumps in and distracts Renoir long enough for the rest of them to escape, and comes to meet them at their camp afterwards. He brings them Gustave's arm alongside his Lumina converter and effectively replaces Gustave's role in Expedition 33. He guides them north through the Forgotten Battlefield to a serene place where they could bury Gustave. They then continue north into the mountains, recruiting Verso's longtime friend Monoko, and then head to Old Lumiere, with the intention of destroying the Paintress's heart within, which should cause the barrier around the monolith to fall. But the group gets split up in Old Lumiere, and Lune, Ciel, and Monoko happen across Expedition 58's journal, where they learn about some of the secrets that Verso had been keeping from them. Namely, that Renoir, the man who slaughtered their expedition at the start of their journey, and who had murdered Gustave in cold blood right in front of Maelle, was his father. When they regroup in the center of Old Lumiere, they try to confront him about his secrecy, but Renoir is there and they have bigger problems. Verso arrives at the city center slightly before everyone else and waits until Maelle arrives, knowing that the Paintress would open the door for her. He tries to break into the Dessendres manor, but Renoir is there to stop him. The Paintress and Painted Alicia remain inside and the door shuts, leaving Verso to confront his father. Everyone survives this encounter with Renoir, but the manor disappears from Old Lumiere, leaving them with no hope of destroying the Paintress's heart within. Back at camp, Lune and Ciel are able to properly question Verso about what they read in Expedition 58's journal. To Verso, his relationship with his father was private and painful, and none of their business, which is not a satisfactory answer to Lune, but Ciel urges them to move on. Lune follows up by mentioning the other big revelation in the journal, another way to breach the barrier by killing the Axons and forging their hearts into a weapon, but Verso feels it's a dead end.
I can't die, and I still couldn't take them down.
He insists their chances are close to zero, but Lune and Ciel are staring death in the face within the next year anyways, and vow that if they die fighting. So they head to the Axons Visage and Sirene, taking them down and having the Curator forge their hearts into the barrier breaker, finally giving them access to the monolith. Before they set off for the barrier, the painted Renoir and Alicia pay Verso a visit at camp, but not to fight this time. Alicia hands Verso a letter which he chooses not to read for now, and Renoir reminds him the consequences of continuing on.
Your despair blinds you. You think you're ready to pay the price. But are you willing to let them pay the price for you?
He reminds Verso that going through with killing the Paintress won't just kick her out of the canvas. It'll unseal the real Renoir, allowing him to gommage everyone and erase the canvas entirely, and the expedition would be unknowingly sealing their own fate. Regardless though, Verso keeps his secrets, and the expedition continues on to the monolith, defeating the painted Renoir and finally confronting the Paintress. She initially recognizes Verso, but her delusions mistake him for the real Verso.
Come along. Let's go home.
Yes. You need to go home.
This is another trick. She's not Alicia. You are not my Verso.
No. Verso's dead.
No. You are his creations, not mine. You will not take this canvas from me.
Again, skipping a lot of this, we've gone over it a couple of times. Back in Lumiere, Verso doesn't join in on much of the festivities, and instead wanders off to the waterfront to finally read the letter that the painted Alicia gave him.
Your mother paints life, whilst your father, death. What will you paint?
As he finishes up the letter, the real Renoir has managed to break free, and Verso watches on as he triggers a complete gommage. He returns to the city to find Maelle all alone, with all of her memories now, and they share a moment accepting who each other really is. They discuss the canvas, its future, what the real Verso would have wanted, and Maelle tells Verso that she'll talk to her father and have him help repaint the canvas. Obviously, Renoir does not comply with his daughter's wishes, and the next battle for the canvas begins. Back at camp, after Maelle repaints Lune and Ciel, Lune tears into Verso for his continued secrecy and refusal to be honest with the rest of them.
I wouldn't have betrayed my expedition. I would have warned them that everyone they cared about was about to be erased. That they were about to be erased. I would have told them the truth. Because after everything we've been through, we deserved that.
I don't need your mea culpa. You did what you felt you had to. Of course, you were wrong. But, oh well.
The expeditioners guilt-trip Verso, and together they all declare it time for the greatest expedition in history. Just as soon as I deal with a bit of side content first and power up a little bit more. And after returning to Lumiere and defeating Renoir, Verso is thrown into an uncomfortable choice. It's about more than just saving Aline. Verso wants out. He wants the ability to properly die and allow his soul to rest. But the only way for that to happen is for the last fragment of his soul trapped within the canvas to stop painting. This means saying goodbye to Esquier, Monoko, Ciel, Lune, Noko, you did revive him, right? Golgra, Francois, and everyone else that either he or Aline had painted. Alicia would have to permanently say goodbye to the world that gave her voice back, which restored her agency after the fire. And the Dessendres would lose the domain they could escape to, where they could still feel Verso's presence, and they'd be forced to face reality and begin to move on. The game has two endings to it, depending on how you're swayed. A life to paint by siding with Maelle, or a life to love by siding with Verso. In Maelle's ending, she forces Verso to continue painting, to keep maintaining the canvas. He doesn't want to live like this, but it's a necessary sacrifice in her mind in order to maintain the world where she can thrive. The game skips ahead a bit, and the people of Lumiere are seen arriving at the Opera House. Esquier and Monoko are seen acting as bouncers, and Maelle is in the aisle with one of Gustave's apprentices looking for her friends. Those who had gommaged are now back, as we can see Ciel with her husband Pierre, and later Gustave and Sophie walk in and sit down with everyone. Verso then solemnly walks on stage, looking like a prisoner in his own canvas being forced to perform for the masses. He walks up to the piano, reluctantly bringing his hands up to the keys. He sounds like he's holding back tears as he gets ready to play. And then the camera switches to Maelle, with her face covered in paint like she'd spent too much time within the canvas, as we hear an unpleasant-sounding chord echo in the hall. In Verso's ending, he forces Maelle to face reality and he shuts down the canvas. Alicia is forced out of the painting while being held in Verso's arms, and then he stands up to give Esquier and Monoko a big hug as they share a tearful goodbye. Ciel slowly walks up to him and reaches out to grab his hand as she gommages, and Lune just kinda plops down on the ground, pouting in protest as she watches Verso lay his canvas and her entire world to rest. Verso walks up to the fading boy that we'd seen in numerous places throughout the game and tells his real self that it's over. He can take his well-earned rest. We then switch over to the real world. The Dessendres family is all gathered together around their son's grave. Renoir holds Aline as if to assure her that it'll all be okay. Clea lays down a bouquet of flowers, and Alicia silently holds on tight to a plushie of Esquier and stares on as her friends from the canvas appear to her and wave one last goodbye. I have lots more to say about everyone involved and the endings and their implications, but this video is going to be way too long if I kept it to one part, so look forward to part 2 where I'll be giving my own personal analysis and interpretations on everything that's happened. I hope this part wasn't too confusing. As I mentioned, there was a lot of overlap between the different characters and I didn't want to tell the same story point 5 times, so some things had to get left out of some sections to get included in another.